Hey, it's Liam. I wanted to make a video about my experience working a ski season in Canada. The cost, the application process, the timings, the visa, stuff like that. There's not great guidance for this online, particularly if you're wanting to do it yourself rather than through an agency. So yeah, I thought I'd just set out how things went. Obviously, it's a pretty fun experience. I'd recommend it. You get to ski or snowboard for a whole season, and it's cost effective and you meet so many great people. In terms of timings, the ski season in Canada runs between December and April. A few of the bigger resorts will stay open until end of May. I applied for my visa in May, so about 6 months prior to the ski season starting, and then job postings would start getting put up online normally around July, and then they would be up until pretty much until ski season started. Don't stress too much about timings, because we met people who came halfway through a season and got jobs. We met people who came to Canada without a job and went in cold places and were successful in getting jobs. If you're dead keen on coming here and you don't have a job, just give it a go. So where do you want to apply for a job? The crux of it is that you'll probably have a great time wherever you go. You can narrow it down to certain styles of resort that you would prefer. I think I applied for about 7 or 8 positions and was asked to interview for 2. It is competitive, and you should be willing to consider a number of resorts. In terms of applying for jobs, my advice would be to cast your net wide. I applied for auditing jobs, I applied for hospitality jobs, I applied for ticketing jobs as well. I ended up working in a snow school, doing primarily desk work, booking lessons and such, but also doing a bit of snowboard instructing. The pay at resorts typically isn't great. You'll be realistically looking at anywhere between $18 and $20 an hour, maybe a bit more if you're a supervisor. Canada does have a tipping culture, so if you do end up working in hospitality, you could be making upwards of $10 extra per hour in tips. Another consideration is going to be how much time you want to spend out on the mountain snowboarding or skiing. Certain jobs obviously involve that. Ones that are indoors, you might be able to take ride breaks depending on your manager. One thing I would mention is that instructing, you're probably going to get a maximum of 6 hours per day. For most days of the season, it was significantly less than that, because it's contingent on people booking lessons, and not many people book lessons on a random Monday, for example. If you want to only work a few hours, instructing could be great, but if you're trying to pay your way, then maybe look at something that gives you a bit more consistent hours. Staff accommodation is definitely the cheapest way of living through a ski season. So in any job application, if you're keen for that, make it known. Ask questions about their staff accommodation options. Typically you're looking at between 400 to 700 Canadian per month for staff accommodation. Obviously that can vary. Private rentals anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500, so a little bit more expensive. Staff accommodation is great, but it's also not the end all and be all. I didn't stay in staff accommodation. It's worth considering. If you get offered a job, would you be willing to pay for private accom? So as I mentioned, there's a few companies out there that charge like $1,500 to take care of your visa process and find you a job. I didn't use one of those, and I get why people do. It gives you certainty and confidence. I just couldn't justify spending that amount of money. If you're doing the visa yourself, you'll have to provide all that information anyway, so you're kind of just skipping the middleman. And then the job application, yeah, it was probably harder having to do it yourself, but I still managed to get a job fine The one thing I would say is that a lot of those companies have agreements with ski resorts, so the number of jobs open to people applying outside of those companies is smaller. They almost have like reservations for certain jobs. The visa process took me about 2 months from my first application through to receiving my visa. I'm from New Zealand and we're entitled to 2-year visas in Canada with a cutoff age of about 36. Same for Australia. I know that Europeans and Japanese are entitled to a 1-year visa. The cutoff age is lower, I think 31. The visa process cost $300 Canadian. I also had to fly to a different city in New Zealand to provide fingerprints for that, which was annoying and another additional cost. There's also a few things you need to provide to border security when you land in Canada. Obviously, you need to provide proof that you've been granted a preliminary visa. It's a hard word to say. And in theory, you also need to provide proof of health insurance for the entire time you plan on being in Canada, $2,500 Canadian, as well as money for flights home, I believe. The border security agent in Vancouver Airport didn't check any of those things aside from my passport and my prelim visa. So I was granted a 2-year visa despite only having health insurance for 8 months. I have met people who flew into Calgary Airport and they were much more rigorous on checking that and were only granted a visa for the extent that they had travel insurance or health insurance. So just something to keep in mind if you're planning on hanging around after your ski season. So when you arrive in Canada, there's a few things you'll need to organize first. You'll need a SIN, social insurance number. You can't open a bank account without one of these. You can't get paid without one of these. It's pretty essential. You'll need to go into a Service Canada branch with your passport and your visa or your work permit now and organize that. Then you can open a bank account. You'll also need that to get paid. So in terms of driving, getting a license, you can either get an international driving permit in your home country before you arrive in Canada. Those are typically valid for 12 months. I opted to get a British Columbia driver's license instead once I arrived in the country because I intended on staying for 2 winters. They do cut up your old license, which I didn't realize, so something to consider. If you're wanting to buy a car in Canada, I will caveat the whole conversation first by saying that they're very expensive secondhand cars. You know, cars here have high kilometers because of ice on the roads. They're often rusty. Prices are pretty expensive. The government taxes 12% on private car sales or 7% on dealership sales. Insurance is also high. I was paying about $120 per month for a Subaru Impreza. It's also compulsory to have what we would call a New Zealand third-party insurance. So insurance to cover other people's vehicles if you cause a crash. So buying a car is something you might want to weigh up. Just factor in the price, look on Facebook Marketplace before you arrive to work out what you might expect to pay. Having a car gives you freedom, especially because working at these resorts, you often get reciprocal passes, which are free one-day tickets to other mountains in the area. I worked at Apex and we had a list of about 30 other mountains we could go to for free or very discounted. So having a car allows you to go and explore both mountains and just British Columbia in general. But if you're comfortable that the place you're moving to is going to be accessible without a car, like you'll be able to get to the supermarket, then maybe for you buying a car won't be necessary. Buying ski gear, if you're coming straight to Canada obviously and you have some back at home, you can just bring that. For me, I was backpacking in Peru with my girlfriend prior to coming to Canada, so I didn't have much with me. But in welcoming contrast to the car market, the snow gear market here is pretty cheap. If you're working at a resort, you probably get discounts. Resources like Facebook Marketplace, Value Village, gear swaps at the start of the winter season are great resources for buying secondhand gear. I was able to pick up a pretty fantastic ski jacket for $30. Okay, so that about sums up my thoughts. If you have questions, let me know and I'll do my best to answer them. Just want to wrap it up by saying that doing a ski season is in Canada super fun. I loved it so much. I'm doing another one next winter. I was able to save money as well while working 40-hour weeks. So it's, it is affordable. Yeah, thanks.